Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, and then we'll start cracking with the webinar. So welcome to our webinar on how to get media coverage for your live stream event. My name's Joe Edwards from TicketCo. I'm a key account manager, and I'm working with a lot of organisers in the UK on how they're moving their events online and creating new revenue streams, obviously during this pandemic and beyond. So just a quick bit, if you haven't joined our webinars before or have not been in contact with TicketCo before, we are a massive kind of development company in terms of becoming the global standard for events payment. Everything we do is for organisers and consumers to purchase easily and ultimately create a seamless customer journey from purchase to event. Our key values are honest, innovative and engaged. And when or if you have worked with us before, I'm sure you'll agree that this is ingrained in the way we operate on a day-to-day basis. So why are we here? So in the scenario that you've now prepared your live stream event, you've confirmed the content or the artists, and you've put the tickets on sale with TicketCo TV. You now need to spread the message, and ultimately PR is a powerful way to do that. We work with a lot of organisers with supporting their PR launches. We've had great response. It also helps you secure vital third-party verification whilst increasing your brand awareness, and it's a great way to ensure you maximise your reach and ultimately drive more sales. Luckily, we're joined today by a marketing expert. That isn't me, but we've got Greig from Fortitude Communications, a UK PR agency, and he's come to outline some of his top tips in gaining media coverage for your events. So over to Greig.
Thanks, Joe. Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to TicketCo for inviting me on. So just a quick little bit about me before we dive into the detail. So my background is I was a career journalist for many years, worked my way through local and regional media, press agencies, and then on to Fleet Street, as it used to be known, and spent about 10 years on a Daily Mirror, which is probably worth a webinar on its own right, but we'll crack on with the main topic shortly. So on the Mirror, I covered all sorts of news across the board, really, and that gave me a really good grounding in, you know, how to develop stories, how to cover events, etc. I then moved into PR about 6 years ago, became managing partner of a PR agency in London, and then moved into sport and become the MD of a football club called Oxford United, League One club in the UK, which gave me a much greater insight into live events and the entertainment industry. I left Oxford United 3 years ago and set up Fortitude, which is a communications and PR agency based in Oxford. So we look after clients across various sectors, including sport, entertainment, events, and we do the PR and comms for TicketCo and TicketCo TV in the UK. And that does mean that on a lot of occasions we collaborate with their clients and help them launch events and things like that. We tend to do a lot of stuff into the media, but also help clients with their own platforms. So, you know, websites, social media, video, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm sure some of you have done press releases and promoted your own events in the past, but hopefully today I'll run through sort of the process that we follow to try and achieve, you know, media coverage for an event, and hopefully through that you'll pick up some sort of insider hints and tips that could help you in the future. I thought it'd be good to start just quickly with what is PR, because I think, like anything, you know, there's lots of misconceptions around or different understandings of what it is. Obviously that doesn't always get help with various stereotypes, but there we are. But essentially the Chartered Institute of Public Relations have put out sort of a definitive line on what they believe it is, and it's just there on the screen. Public relations is about reputation, the result of what you do, what you say, and what others say about you. So if you think about that that's actually quite powerful, and it makes you sort of appreciate that anything that you do externally in terms of communications is kind of public relations. And I think, you know, if you say public relations rather than PR, you start to appreciate that it's quite a broad topic that could, you know, go from public speaking through to all sorts of things, you know, how you communicate with your customers, etc. Okay, so how can PR help your live stream event or your event generally? Joe touched on it in the intro there, but there's a few things that I thought I'd perhaps just outline there where it can help, and some of them aren't as obvious as others. So it's worth going through this briefly before we get into finer detail. So firstly, third-party verification. You know, it's great. It's all well and good that, you know, as the event organizer or the venue, that you say, hey, we've got this event and it's going to be great. You're going to say that, aren't you? So, you know, having a newspaper or a magazine or a popular blogger or something like that write about your event, that can be powerful in that sense, because it's, people might start going, oh well, if, you know, if the Telegraph or the Times are writing about it, then it must be good. So it can really help with brand awareness and going back to that first slide, with the reputation of your company. And then through that, going on to the next point, it can help with enhancing the perceived value of either your business or your event or your venue. Again, you know, if you're getting covered regularly in some premium magazines, it could help with, you know, how you're perceived, and therefore potentially what you could charge for your tickets over time. Obviously, your event's got to be good in the first instance, but I think you get what I mean. It obviously helps increase your brand awareness and your reputation, which pins back to that original point of PR. And I guess through the brand awareness, it's just using, and I think this is the purpose of PR now, with so many different platforms and channels available to PR practitioners. There's so many ways that you can spread your brand awareness now, which is amazing. So it's finding all your different target audiences through different means, essentially. Of course, it can support the sales activity, and that's really important. Another interesting point is that it can support your Google ranking. So what does that mean? Basically, how Google ranks you. So your company, you know, if somebody searched, I don't know, events in London or Brighton or wherever it is you may be, where are you going to appear in that search ranking? Are you going to be on page 1, which is obviously what everybody wants to achieve? So if you're putting quality content on your website regularly, but you're also gaining mentions in high ranking authority websites like the Daily Mail or the BBC, that's going to help you climb that Google ladder. And then of course it can help support your social media activity. You know, if you have an article in a newspaper or magazine, of course you can then share it on your social media. Okay, so before getting into perhaps how you're actually going to directly PR your event, you know, let's think about those first steps in that journey. What are the key considerations that you should bear in mind before making your decisions on how you're actually going to do that? So what's the point? You know, what are the business objectives that PR can support? I see a lot of people that sort of try and get coverage for the sake of it. So, you know, it might be in a magazine that's irrelevant to your business. So, you know, you kind of start questioning it. So what are the business objectives? Is it to sell more tickets? Probably. Okay, so if we understand that, we can start working towards that objective. How can it enhance your reputation? That, again, is a really important point, because as you start developing your story, you can start dressing in terminology and information that not only will PR your event, but will start to enhance the reputation of your venue or your company, whatever it is, more broadly. How do you want your business to be perceived? You know, do you want to be perceived as a, I don't know, a venue that really promotes young talent and gives them those first opportunities in the live music industry? Or do you want to be perceived as a very premium brand? Or, you know, do you have great sustainability objectives, etc.? So all those things for me need to be considered at this early stage, so that whoever's doing the PR for you can put that into the strategy and then into the messaging that goes out. Who are your target audience? Yeah, they're young people, middle-aged people, families. etc.? Is it some sort of subculture? Because if we, once we understand that, obviously we can then define where we're going to go in terms of the media. And again, what are your key messages? And that sort of stems off how you want to be perceived, but also then, what sort of phrases are we actually going to use in the articles that we put out to make sure that you're communicated as effectively as possible. And I guess that feeds into, every time you go to the media, it's an opportunity, and you want to maximize that to the best of your ability, really. And where would this piece of PR activity fit into your wider communications and marketing strategy? So if you have one, let's make sure that there's consistency in message and that sort of thing, and there's no overlaps. Okay, so once you sort of had that initial thought process and it's been discussed, etc., we can start the planning process properly. So I think, when there's a one-off event, it's very tempting to say, hey, let's just whack out a quick press release. But this is important. People are going to read it. Think about your reputation. Let's get this right. Okay. And it might be you're doing a series of events. So, you need a wider plan. So start with a strategy. And the way we practice PR, that actually means how are we going to position you? What's the point? And, how's this company going to be described publicly? That's the first piece of work. Then you move into a content plan, which is essentially your tactical activity. So it might be you've got your calendar events, and then we map out when we're going to go live to communicate that event, and you essentially create your plan. And another thing to consider when you're doing that plan is there's an opportunity to tell your story in many different ways. You might just want to say, hey, this event's happening, but when we get further into the slide, you'll see that to really be effective in PR, start thinking of stories, because when you contact journalists, they're thinking in stories. So you may have one event, but there might be 4, 5, 6 different ways of communicating that event to the media in different ways, and we'll come on to that. And that, of course, then helps you maximize the opportunities and, of course, build momentum. So you might have that initial, hey, this is happening, but over time you might want to do some landmark stories around we've hit X amount of sales, or we've just announced some more artists, etc., just to keep that momentum and keep it in the public domain, and obviously help you sell tickets. Okay, so the next thing to consider when you're planning to go out to the media is it's just good to have this background knowledge, if you like, and this comes from my journalism background. What is news? And it might sound a bit obvious because most of us on this webinar has probably watched the news or read the news at some point in our life, I'd like to think, but it's the giveaways in the name. It's got to be new, and also, of course, it's got to inform. So if you watch the news this morning, most of the things on there would be pretty new, whether it's X companies just announced some redundancies, unfortunately, or whatever it may be. And then the next bit's really interesting when you start constructing your articles. And this is what you're taught essentially in the first seminar at journalism school, the 5 W's. Who, what, why, when, where, and how. You're going to think, it's not 5 W's, it's 5 W's and a H, but it was originally the 5 W's, and then how got added on at some point in time, and it didn't change the name. But essentially, every article you read in a newspaper or online ought to have that in there. And when it's worth just perhaps writing that down, and when you construct your article or your press release, making sure you've touched all those in your communication. So who is probably going to be the name of your venue or your events. What, there's an event happening. Why? Well, if it's virtual, it might be, well, we're closed because of COVID. When, obviously, is when it's happening. Where? Well, if it's virtual, it's going to be online. How? Via TicketCo TV, hopefully. So that's just a really good sort of process to follow. Okay, so you've gone through that process of what are we going to do and why. You've got your plan. You've got your event that you want to communicate. So what are some other things to consider when you want to start actually making the news and getting people to read about your event? Okay, first important thing is to deliver news, a story. Provide a story, not an advert. And I think a trap a lot of people fall into is they contact the media and they're ringing up a news desk or sending an email to a news editor or somebody like that, and they're kind of giving them an advert. You know, some tickets are on sale or something like that, or a new product's come out. It's not a good enough story for them to run it. So if you start putting yourself in the shoes of the journalist, when they answer the phone to you, all they're thinking is this a story? Is this going to be of interest to our readers? Is it relevant to our geography or our patch, etc.? So, you know, there's simple ways to do that. And again, you know, when we come on to some live examples shortly, you'll see what I mean on that. Also, be targeted. Think about who you want to contact. So, for example, if your event is happening in a certain place in your country, you know, obviously make sure you utilize the media that's local to that venue, but then you might also want to utilize the trade and industry press that's relevant to your sector, and maybe even the national press if you've got some really exciting artists or performers lined up. And then you start creating your media list. So that's essentially which journalist on those publications you're going to contact. Because some of these newspapers might have an entertainment writer or a what's on guide or something like that. And then of course you've got a news desk, a features desk. So you might go to news in the first instance, but later on you might go to features with a follow-up full interview with the headline act, for example. So it's really important to break that list down, because what you don't want to do is send the press release to the wrong person and they won't read it. And as you create that list, another thing, and we'll come on to tips to how to engage with journalists, but try and find out who these people are, get their names. You know, every newspaper is going to have a generic info at or news desk at address. But if you can actually start identifying people and writing to them and using their name, it really does help. Timing's important. Best time of the day, week to distribute to the media. For example, it's not wise to send a press release out at 4:30 on a Friday. Number one, they run skeleton staff, a lot of the publications, on a Friday, because a lot of them tend to work on a weekend. And obviously they've probably just gone to print and all those things. Monday mornings can be a bit tricky too. What I would recommend if you're hitting a daily publication is getting early in the working day, because they tend to have an editorial conference around 10:30, 11:30 in the morning, where all the department heads will tell the editor what stories they've got for that day, and then the editor will start saying which stories he or she's interested in. So, you know, you really want to get in early and get on that list if you can. And equally, if you're pitching to a weekly, you want to get in at the start of the week, because their deadline's probably going to be a Wednesday or a Thursday to go to print, etc. And obviously online's a bit different, but I think earlier in the day the better. It would be my suggestion on that. Over time, obviously, you can build relationships with key journalists, and I think, you know, if they do publish a story for you, I'd recommend, you know, just a quick thank you by email, and then, you know, opening up that channel to say, hey, if I get something in the future, I'll send it to you, and, you know, just little things like that. And in terms of approach, as I say, you know, what I'd also recommend is not sending the same press release to multiple journalists on the same publication, because what would happen in reality is, on the inside, one of those journalists will go, oh, this is a good story, go to their boss and say, hey, I've got this, only to find out that their colleague did it 5 minutes earlier, and it can just sort of annoy them and frustrate them. So I think it's better to send it to one relevant person. Okay, so the key to all this really is trying to master the art of storytelling, because that's essentially what we're doing here. So the key to that is getting your hook right. If you think about it, journalists get stacks of emails and press releases in every day. When I was on the Mirror, on the news desk, to give you a quick example, we used to get something like 3,000 stories a day come across our desk from around the world. We probably printed 150 of them. So, you know, that funnel starts, you know, it's quite a challenge to actually achieve that coverage. So grabbing their attention straight away is absolutely crucial, and we'll come on to that when we show you some examples very shortly in terms of headline and intro. So thinking about your event and just trying to sort of help you follow a process to just get it as clear as possible. Obviously, you know, what are the things that you've got that you can turn into a story? So what is the event? Who's performing? Obviously, if you've got an A-lister, there's your story. You know, are they a big name? If they're not, hey, maybe they're really up and coming, you know, and that's going to appeal to a lot of people, and that could be really interesting. Maybe the artist or the performer's got something interesting in their background that could be brought to life by a human interest story or something like that. Is it the first time your company is doing a live stream event? That's been an effective communications tool for us in the last couple of months. Obviously, as you know, people are adapting to COVID, and that can be a very compelling story right now. The media in particular are very interested in how businesses are adapting in a positive way. And you know, this certainly is one. And why are you doing it? So if it is a COVID related situation, you're doing it obviously to keep the business afloat probably, and to support local artists or whatever it may be. And what does that mean for ticket buyers? Well, it means they still can see their favorite artists, they still can have that engagement, they still can be entertained, they still can see some live performances, because of course at the moment a lot of TV is you know, full of repeats. Okay, so some further tips on storytelling. Just a few things to remember that you know might not be so obvious if you don't do this on a regular basis. Fundamentally, stories are about people, and you know, if it might be that you know it's the artists or a team or the CEO or something like that. Make sure that you know you've got the relevant spokespeople lined up for your article. I see a lot of corporate press releases where, you know, when it gets to the comments, they'll say a spokesman said, and that's, you know, certainly for the events industry, that's just too dry. People want to hear from people. Think about exclusives as well. The media love exclusives. If you've got a really strong story, consider going to one, you know, the media outlet that you think would move the dial the most for your organization, and offer them an exclusive, you know, an interview or the opportunity to come and film, whatever it may be, and really give them that opportunity to sort of lead on it. And that's not a barrier to you then sharing it, you know, sharing the story of everybody else afterwards, but it might just give you that opportunity to get a really decent piece of coverage. The other thing to bear in mind is certainly with press releases is photos, and it's something that often, you know, you get wrapped up in the press release and getting it right and writing it and getting it out there. Often people forget about a photo. And you know, if you think about the composition of a story online or in print, a good story is always got a picture with it, you know, and it's got to be something, you know, something eye-catching, something with impact. And that's why I put the picture on this slide that I have, because you know it has all those things, and that obviously that picture's not going to be relevant for everyone, but try not to just put a picture out of a, you know, just a building or something like that. Try and get something that's quite eye-catching, quite impactful, something that obviously is relevant to what you're doing. But also one other thing to bear in mind is if you look at most online platforms and newspapers and magazines, they tend to use landscape photos, and the way a lot of modern websites now configured, they tend to be landscape pictures. So I would recommend putting out a landscape picture. I'd also recommend putting out one great photo, but then saying, you know, we have others if you want them, because one thing to bear in mind is if you put too many pictures on the email, you know, it might not get through. It might be too heavy. Another thing to make sure you do is make sure the press release is punchy, ready to go, and we'll show an example, I think, in a slide or two. And another thing to consider is what partnerships you have. Think about how you can spread your messages as far and wide as possible through, obviously make sure it's relevant, but what can you do beyond the media list that you've created? You know, what can you do beyond the national media, the trade press, the local media? You know, so for example, if you're doing an event and TicketCo are selling your tickets for you or broadcasting your event through their live stream platform, TicketCo could put your press release on their website, on their blog page. They could promote it through their social media channels. If you're a traveling event company, I'm sure the venue would do the same for you, because it's in everyone's interest to sell the tickets and make this event successful. A few more tips then quickly on your press release. I think I've already said, make the headline very sharp and grab that attention, get to the point, think about those 5 W's, make sure that at least 2 or 3 of those are in the very first sentence of the press release, because when editors are reading these things, when they first receive them, if they don't get the story and understand the story in the headline, in that first heading, that first sentence, they probably won't read the rest. As I said, you know, think about those guys that are getting 3,000 press releases a day. They're not going to read 2/3 of the way down to get to the point and understand what it is. That's how clinical it is, purely because I haven't got time. So you've really got to grab their attention immediately. And if you think about it, when they're passing that story on to their readers or their viewers, it's the same. You guys, when you consume your news, you need to understand it straight away as well. And it needs to be compelling enough at the top to encourage you to read the rest of it. So, you know, think about that when you're crafting your content. Keep to the point and don't have waffle. Again, what I'd encourage you to do if you are going to write a press release, have a read of some of the websites and the newspapers that you would like to appear in. Look at how they approach and handle stories, how they present them, what sort of terminology do they use, and rest assured there won't be any waffle in those in their articles, because they don't have the space to do so. What I'd also recommend is make the copy as ready to go as possible. And what do I mean by that? A lot of newspapers and magazines now are quite short-staffed and quite time-starved. So if you can provide them with a story on a plate, as it were, that's ready to go, pretty much written in their style, without the waffle, etc., you've got a really good chance of that appearing on their website without any changes being made to it. And a lot of the content that we put out does appear, it does get published without any changes to it, which is absolutely brilliant from, you know, PR's point of view, from our client's point of view, because it means you can be in control of that message. Make sure you include a quote, of course. You know, so you've said your story in the first few sentences, and then have somebody talking and going into more detail about the story. Don't be too salesy. Going back to what I said earlier, you know, just it's striking that right balance. Of course, there's a commercial point to what we're doing, but you know, there's sort of a line to tread, as it were. How long should a press release be? Do you know what? I would say if you've got a really good story to tell it all. If that means it's 3 sides of writing, so be it. You know, and obviously the more copy you give them, the more space they can give you. What I wouldn't do is just give them 6 sentences, because then you're not going to get much coverage because you haven't given them much. But by and large, on the whole, most press releases tend to be a side to a side and a half of sort of a Word document. What I'd also recommend nowadays is to include a link at the bottom of the article to your website or to your ticket sales page, whatever it may be. A lot of online publications now, you know, will include links, which is great. It helps the sales process, but also, again, going back to the Google ranking element, it can help with how Google rates your website. And then at the bottom of the press release, make sure you include your contact details. And notes to editors is something that you have after the press release, which is kind of extra information that might not be strong enough for the press release, or it might just be embellishing on information. That tends to be more info on the company or the venue or something like that. Okay, so here's an example. This is a press release we did back in May. I hope you can see that. It's not the whole press release, it's probably about the top half of it. And this is a press release we did for a TicketCo TV client called Just a Tonic. And Just a Tonic are a UK comedy promoter. So they do stand-up comedy in up until COVID in venues dotted around the UK. They've embraced TicketCo TV to do live streaming, bringing various comedians on, you know, to do their own shows. And they've been very, very successful. And they're now doing those on a monthly basis. And what that's meant is, you know, they can keep active while they can't open up and have their their events and their venues, which, you know, is kind of the point of the live streaming service. So once they signed up with TicketCo TV asked us at Fortitude if, you know, we could do a launch press release announcing the partnership. And this is where it gets interesting, because, you know, we do that for TicketCo TV, obviously to promote TicketCo TV, but it's a great service and value add for the TicketCo TV client. And it gets them the coverage as well. And what we often end up doing is 2 press releases, one that's very much focused on they've partnered with TicketCo TV, and that goes on the TicketCo TV website and also out into the trade press. But then we might tweak it and just make it a little bit more relevant for the Just a Tonic or whoever the client is, for their audience, and to help them get coverage. So, okay, remembering all the pointers that I've given you this morning, having a look at that headline: Just a Tonic Comedy Club become inaugural partner of TicketCo TV pay-per-view service. And then the intro: leading UK comedy promoter Just a Tonic have partnered with TicketCo to launch its own TV station to entertain people staying at home. And then the next sentence, we name the headline act, who you know, most people in the UK would have heard of and seen on TV. So you can see what we've done there. It could have, you know, for people that perhaps aren't used to writing stories, they might not have thought, hey, what a really cool way to make this eye-catching to the media is to say we're launching our own TV station. That sounds really new, really different, quite cool. And that grabs the attention, going back to that point of how can we grab attention in straight away. So that's what we did there. And obviously John Richardson being the headline act obviously did help with achieving coverage as well, because, you know, everyone's heard of him here in the UK. So that's what we did there. And then you'll see further down in the article, we go into quotes from the founder of Just a Tonic, you know, and his quote is, if you can't go to the comedy club, we'll bring the comedy club to you. TicketCo's innovation has created a wonderful opportunity for us to continue to engage and deliver brilliant comedy and a bit of relief during a tough period for everybody, i.e. COVID lockdown. So you see how we've taken that event and we've presented it in a very particular way. So on the next slide, you'll see what that translated to in terms of coverage. No, you won't. We've got another slide to go, sorry. Okay, right, I was getting ahead of myself. So we've got the press release. What are we going to do with it? It's all well and good having a press release, but you want to land that somewhere. So what are you going to do next? So you've got your media list. You've identified the right media to go to in the different sections. How do you get that media list? Okay, so PR agencies tend to sign up to a database called Gorkana. We pay a monthly subscription, and basically you can put in search terms and you can get the contact details for any journalist going. Now, that's great. If you've got a PR agency, brilliant, they'll do that for you. If you're doing it yourself, you know, there's plenty of information out there. You know, Google all the publications you'd like to appear in, and before you know it, you're going to get some of their contact details off the website, or you might find the journalist that writes about a certain thing, and then you go on Twitter and somehow you piece together their email address. And over time, you'll build up that important list. Cover all bases. What do I mean by that? Well, you know, you've got your press release. That's probably going to be relevant for a news desk, but, you know, check out whether they've got a what's on guide as well. If it's a sporting event, you might want to go to sport rather than news, that sort of thing. And also, you know, think about where your event's taking place. So if it's taking place, say, in Brighton, you want to go to the newspaper in Brighton just as much as the national media, etc. You know, if it's an artist that's coming from overseas into the UK, you might want to hit the media where they're from as well, etc. So it's just maximizing your opportunity. Another thing to just stress us here as well is don't forget broadcast. I think, you know, doing that written word and getting that press release down, we often get it out to all the websites, and there's nothing better than having it there online. It's going to stay there, and you can share the link on LinkedIn and things like that. Broadcast is powerful too. The audience and viewing figures of, say, the BBC or Sky or something like that are huge now. So it's really worth considering them as well, especially local radio stations. How to make contact with journalists. What I'd really recommend is going direct, saying, you know, hi Greg, hi Joe, rather than just dear all, because then they just think, oh, we're just lumped in with everybody else. This, you know, make them feel valued. and make it as relevant as possible. Try and identify the best person as best you can. And I would recommend copying that press release into the main body of the email. Don't make them click and open an attachment. They haven't got time. They probably won't. And people are a little bit nervous about opening attachments nowadays. So get it copied into the main body of the email. Put the story in the headline of the email. Again, you want to grab attention at every opportunity. I would do the picture as an attachment, but reduce the resolution a little bit. We've already touched on timings. If it's a really good story that you think is going to be really relevant to someone, another tip is perhaps ring them the week before you're going to launch it. Say, hey, got this story that I think is really up your street. We've got this amazing headline act that's going to be performing in your city. Just wanted to let you know about it now so you can plan ahead. We're going to issue it on Tuesday. And anything that we can do for you, etc., etc. Would you like to talk to them, interview them, whatever it may be? And then you're getting ahead of it. Then they can plan for it. Then if you're going to a journalist, they've got something good to take to their boss. Think about it. These journalists are under pressure to go up to their editors every day with stories. So, I think it's good to go to the journalist rather than the editor with some of these things, because then they're essentially going to pitch it for you internally and become your cheerleader inside their office. Okay, so that press release we showed you a minute ago, what did that result in? What could it look like? So one of the things we did with that press release, and again, this is going back to how can you carve up your message. The comedy club have got venues in different parts of the UK. So we had that one generic press release, but then what we actually did was adapted it for different geography for each part of the UK where they've got a venue and hit their local media. So as you can see there, we've got one for Nottingham. Nottingham Comedy Club launches own TV channel with John Richardson first on the bill. And then the same thing, Birmingham, what's on? And then the next one is Standout Magazine, which is one of the top trade press for the events industry here in the UK. You've got that original press release I just showed you, just a tonic, sign up with TicketCo TV. So what we're doing there is we're hitting a pre-existing audience in different geographies that have already got that touch point with the comedy club. And then with the standout one is probably helping more with reputation. And then there's more. And that, you can see from the headlines just how that sort of landed. Lovely headline there. Online comedy club is just a tonic for lockdown blues, etc., etc. And you'll see from some of the mastheads there, we were hitting a lot of trade press and a bit of industry press and some of the comedy press as well. So that, there are magazines that specialize in comedy. I think overall we probably got about a dozen hits from that one press release. And because the show went really well and they sold a lot of tickets, as I say, that's now become a monthly event. So this process, can be repeated and repeated because, of course, they have different headline acts each time. And that's kind of it, really. Sorry, it's probably quite a lot in a short space of time, a lot to take in, but I hope I've demonstrated that by following some core principles and having a thought process and a plan, you can make sure that you get the right processes in place and then really work on creating a good, compelling story. And then once you've got that story, how can you go about making sure that it appears in various places?
That's great. Thanks, Greg. It's really interesting. Really interesting, especially from my world as mainly in sales and working with a lot of organisers. It's really interesting to see what happens behind the curtain with PR. And there's one question I had actually from here, and it's something that I think is relevant for a lot of people moving to online events, but also the traction that online publications are having on this. And is there an appetite from online publications to be involved in promotions? So naturally, in the past with written press, we'd have a 50% off voucher in the newspaper, but you have to collect 3 newspapers to get your discount and all these types of opportunities. But do online publications, is it well received that they could have an exclusive on a discount or a promotion?
That's a good question. Interestingly, with online, just before I answer that, what we're experiencing now is, as you're probably all aware, huge explosion in traffic for online publications, absolutely huge, which is fantastic for people that land PR on them, obviously. I think there is an appetite for that. I think that the media are still probably feeling their way into that a little bit. You know, that they had very tried and tested ways of doing it in print, as you just touched on, Joe. But I think with the way that the media is going and more, you know, moving online, I do think there's scope for that. Some people have done it and it's worked really well. And I think the great benefit as well is obviously you're going to get that direct traffic, and it's a great promotional tool, but also, of course, that publication is then going to really work with your PR person to promote that event. And, you know, they might run a few exclusive interviews and things like that to really maximize that link up. So yes, I do believe it's viable. It's an opportunity. It's a little bit more complicated than the process I've just outlined to you guys this morning, because what you'd then have to do is probably bring the publication's sort of commercial department or advertising department into the conversation, and you'd probably have to do that prior to going to the editorial department. So the process in terms of your approach would be different.
Great, that answers that. So the chat's going to remain open. Thanks, Greg, for your time. Really, again,
my pleasure.
Really
thanks everyone for listening in. Thank you.
Great, and the chat will remain open. We'll be around to answer any questions if you have. But thanks for joining, and we'll keep you updated with any new webinars that are coming to light soon. Thank you.
Thank you.